Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today on the topic of violence in relationships. Really appreciate you guys being here. My name is Nicole Cairns. I'm the Community Policing Services Coordinator with the Coquitlam RCMP, and myself and the community policing team are really excited to be able to bring you this topic today. I want to begin by acknowledging that violence in relationships is obviously a very sensitive topic. And it can be a trigger for many. So I know that many of the people that signed up today will be aware of the topics we're covering. If you're watching this on a recording later, just be aware that we are going to be discussing the story of Maple Batalia and her death. And if that is something that might bother you, please feel free to stop watching and reach out to us for resources and information later, and we'd be happy to get that to you. While it's a sensitive topic, it's also such an important topic to discuss. There can be such a fear to come forward, both for the victim of violence in a relationship and also for the friends and family who sometimes, while they really want to reach out and help, aren't quite sure how to do it. What's the right time? Should they even do that? Will it risk the friendship? So we're hoping with this webinar that we can ensure that people will be able to recognize abusive behavior and become aware of resources and services that we've got available for you in the community. To help me shed some light on this important topic, I have some of my community partners. So joining us, Sergeant Heather Matthew, who's the Provincial Domestic Violence Coordinator in BC for the RCMP. Carol Metz-Murray, the Executive Director of Tri-City Transitions Society. Julia Nigra, a Victim Support Worker with the Coquitlam RCMP. And Benisha AUJLA, who is a close friend of Maple Batalia. So thank you all for joining us and being a part of our panel today. 10 years ago, Maple Batalia thought her relationship was over. Her ex-boyfriend didn't take that news very well, texted, called her thousands of times, became aggressive with some of her friends. So when Maple left the Surrey campus, where she was a student at SFU, she was studying to become a doctor. And she was walking out to her vehicle one evening when her ex-boyfriend was waiting for her. He shot her multiple times, resulting in her tragic death. So we are going to start this webinar looking into that a little bit more. And we're going to do that by looking at a couple of videos that Benisha has brought for us to take a look at. And the first one's going to tell you a little bit more about Maple Batalia, as well as her family's plea for justice.
Help us and help us, because we are right now the very downtrodden people living in this house with no lights, as our angel is not with us. And please, it's an appeal from the father and the mother of late Maple Batalia.
Please help us, because our innocent daughter killed. She can't do anything wrong. So the people who saw everything, please help us for justice.
I just want to keep my sister's memories alive, but I also am pleading as a sister for her justice. So we as a community can heal. We as a community can see that there is a problem and that there are solutions. And what happened to Maple doesn't happen to anyone else. She lit up a room. So you saw her pictures. You guys didn't get to know her. The community didn't get to, like, a lot of people didn't know her, but they will not ever forget her face. She was not a snob. She was not just a pretty face. She had the heart of gold. She would say hi to anyone. She would smile to everyone. She was a friendly person. She was very humble. Her looks weren't, I'm really good looking. She knew she was Hollywood, she was in Diaries of a Wimpy Kid too, but she would never announce that to you. That's how humble she was. She wouldn't be like, you need an appointment to see me. She was always like striving for more, but she worked hard for it. She didn't take shortcuts. Anything she started in life, whether it was modeling, acting, school, she did it to the degree that we were wowed. That, wow, Maple, how do you do this? I was like, Maple, how are you studying at 3 in the morning? She's like, well, I have a shoot at 7 and I can't have time for this and I need to do it all. She was superwoman. And that's why God gave her wings. And you know, this face, she deserves everything and anything, but I wish I could trade it all to have her back, and I can't. And everything we do in life will never be enough because she set the standard so high. This is her portfolio that she made herself. And this is her grad class. And she's right there, and she's missing. To everyone from Enver Creek who knew my sister, or anyone who knew anything that happened to her, you know that we're all affected by this. We're all waiting for closure. And that face right there is gone from Enver Creek Secondary last year. And I don't want any more of these faces to be gone. My sister did not deserve this. No one's sister does. No human deserves to be brutally slaughtered the way my sister was. So please, for the sake of mankind, humanity, don't protect the criminals. Speak up for Maple. She has no voice.
Please help us.
For justice.
We need justice. Help us.
Okay, thank you, Benisha. And then we have a second video, which shows the victim impact statement as read by Maple's friends and family as well.
When it's sentence day, even police officer cry when we read that a victim impact.
So basically, when the sentencing happened for Battalia, we all had our statements.
Victim impact statement. Victim impact statement.
Victim impact statement that I read during the trial that we read in court the day that Gary Battalia was sentenced.
So as Your Honor, September 28th, 2011 was the day that changed my life forever.
As I'm writing this, March 4th is fast approaching, which in the past would normally be a day of celebration, but is now a dark reminder that Maple's gone because we shared the same birthday.
I remember sitting in a room at the hospital, not knowing what happened to her and not even being able to see her in her last moments. I never thought that anyone could ever hurt Maple like this.
It was hard to focus on anything after that night. It felt like a nightmare. Seeing my beautiful friend, once full of vitality and laughter, laying pale and lifeless in the open casket on her funeral will forever be imprinted into my mind.
During her body viewing and funeral, I did not touch her body because I wanted to remember her for her warm heart and how she had brought light into every environment she entered.
Hearing her mother screaming in torment as the casket holding her daughter's precious body was taken away haunted me.
We, her friends and sisters, have spent the last 4.5 years trying to understand why.
Gary, not only did your actions take away Maple's life, you destroyed so many other people's life in the process.
Maple was fighting a battle with you emotionally and physically. You need to know Maple was a fighter till her very last breath.
Gary, Maple wanted to come home that night. She never got the chance to because you decided to play God and end her life. She had done nothing wrong to deserve what happened to her. The way you took her life away, people do not even do that to an animal. You made sure nothing was left of her.
For 4.5 years, we are only reminded of how she was taken from us with each and every cold detail of her murder.
4.5 years has passed since the day where your actions have changed my life forever.
We've waited over 4 years for justice and went through agony each and every day. We were constantly reminded of the night you took her away.
We almost feel robbed of our happy memories with Maple. Hearing the horrendous way in which you killed her is unbearable.
There is no time to say goodbye or an opportunity of any sort to have closure.
Not only did we lose Maple, but we lost her innocence. After that day, we have never been able to see life in the colors which we saw them in before. We try to find solace in Maple's memories, but the reality behind her death overpowers.
I had lost all trust in everyone, and I had completely isolated myself. I cried myself to sleep holding Maple's black reflex jacket every night.
I would break down emotionally almost every day, thinking about that beautiful little angel that filled my heart with so much joy throughout my life. I sometimes break down crying, either at work, driving, or when I'm alone.
We had heard of death, but at the innocent age of 19, we experienced a tragedy. cold-blooded murder of our dear friend and sister.
I had a hard time understanding how the world could continue on day by day without Maple Batalia in it.
After all this is over, lives will continue, the world will go on, but Maple will never come back, and that void will never be filled.
Nobody could love us as much as she did. She had a genuine concern for others, and everyone she came across in her short life speaks so highly of the pure heart she had.
Maple illuminated a bright light into this dark world. She wanted to make the world a better place, and she would have done it. Her death was like stomping on a flower right before it blooms.
But Gary, you may have taken her life, but you cannot take away the legacy she left behind and the lives she touched. Her name will live on in our hearts. Her life will not go in vain.
Maple will be forever remembered as a beautiful soul that radiated love and kindness. Her life was a gift to those that had the honor of loving her. A light as bright as Maple's cannot be put out. Sometimes I can feel her radiant energy shining down. Maple Batalia will live on eternally through the loving memories and through all the good that she did.
We quote Maple, "I'm free. I can finally breathe." Just thinking back, remember me sitting there in court and looking at Gary. Yeah, I'll never forget that.
Thank you for those videos, Benisha, and thank you so much for being here. As both of those videos showed, domestic violence doesn't just hurt the victim, it hurts those that are closest to the victim as well. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your experience with Maple.
Thanks, Nicole. I just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce myself. So my name is Benisha, and I just want to thank you for your time and allowing us to share Maple's story and our experiences. We want you to take a moment and think about your loved ones. Imagine that it is possible for someone that you know or see every day to be taken away because of an unhealthy relationship. This is how Maple was taken away from her friends and family, from us. This is exactly how we used to webcam with Maple as her best friends. This is how Gary connected with his friends in his high school too. We were like you at one point in time, just 1 year before her murder. But we never thought we would be sitting where we are now, presenting this to you. When Maple and Gary's relationship began, it was exciting, and they both found themselves to be in a happy place. Gary asked Maple to be his girlfriend at the PNE. They spent a lot of time together where they built respect and trust for one another. We saw this firsthand because we were all good friends. They were like most healthy couples. They talked on the phone, they went on dates to the movies, and they quickly became each other's person. There were many red flags over the course of their relationship that none of us or Gary's friends picked up on. Somewhere along the years, things started to change between Maple and Gary. In grade 11, Gary started to get into fights. He became attracted to fighting and drugs. This impacted his life, his relationships, his choices, changed the person he once was. The thing is, Gary used to be a decent guy. He was kind, funny, and if you ever needed anything, he would be there. Gary had a lot of friends who were in disbelief that Gary was responsible for Maple's murder up until he was arrested. One of his close friends said, "I was shocked when I woke up in the morning and found out Maple was killed. A part of me didn't believe it was Gary because I thought I knew him. I never thought he was capable of doing something so horrible. I wish I could go back and do something to help him." We often wondered and asked each other, why is Maple even with him? If he's that crazy, then why doesn't she just leave him? At one point in the relationship, we even remember thinking, wow, Maple is so whipped. But being so unaware of what abuse looked like, we didn't realize what was actually going on in their relationship until it was too late. This was because we didn't know that abuse went beyond pushing and shoving someone. Abuse comes in different forms. And in this case, Maple and Gary's case, it started off with emotional and verbal abuse. Then came jealousy. And over time, all of this rage and anger grew in Gary. We were 17. Maple, Benita, and I worked at Staples, and we had a coworker that became our friend. And oftentimes you would find us in the aisles of Staples cracking jokes and making fun of one another. Gary didn't like this, so he went and threatened our coworker. In the end, our coworker ended up transferring to another Staples location in the fear of Gary beating him up. Another memory which always haunts us is our grade 12 graduation trip. While we were in Cuba, Maple was attached to Gary, not hanging out with any of her friends. That night when we all got together, she wore sunglasses even though the sun wasn't out. But none of us questioned why she was wearing them, because we were just focused in on why she wasn't hanging out with us. Months later, we came to know what had actually happened in Cuba. Gary had punched Maple because she received a text message from her coworker. He then brought her an ice pack for her black eye. He was saying sorry at the same time he was threatening her of what he would do if she told anyone about her eye. If only we had known what to look for and what the signs of an unhealthy relationship were, we would have been able to help Maple and Gary. Just like this, things started to change between Maple and Gary. He started becoming more controlling and possessive. Gary started to power call. Gary would call Maple 50 times in a row, and she would just turn her phone over like it was normal, and she was used to it. Gary was constantly putting Maple down, saying Maple wasn't pretty enough or good enough, and no one else would be with her, and she would never be able to do better than him. Gary started to follow Maple wherever she went, even if she was just with her girlfriends. He didn't like her being anywhere but home or with him. He started to make her feel like her loved ones didn't care or wanted to hang out with her or care about her. He created distance between her friends and her family. Gary was extremely jealous. Gary would call during our 5-minute block during every period in high school, and he would freak out if he heard any guy in the background, even if it was just Maple walking down the hallway. So she started taking his calls, but far away from everyone. Next thing you know, Maple wasn't allowed to talk to any guy or even about school, homework, or work. Gary started to threaten suicide if Maple left. Gary drove his car into a pole when she tried to break up with him and overdosed on pills, calling her and said that he was going to die if you break up with me. Gary manipulated Maple. He would fight with her and call her names for something as simple as not answering his call. He would make her feel worthless, and next thing you know, there would be flowers or gifts sent to her home. Was she scared of him? Yes. Was she scared of him killing her? No. The strategy she had chosen to remove him from her life was, I'm going to slowly back away. When we questioned why she doesn't just cut Gary off, she explained, I can't do that because he has a temper and it'll just make things worse. She was scared he would hurt himself. At this point, she just wanted him to go away, but go away didn't mean anything to Gary. The end result of these patterns was that Gary felt assured he was able to plan to kill Maple. We nor Maple thought he was capable, but as we see, patterns do not lie. At the end of this all, it comes down to one thing. And that one thing is that Maple is dead and Gary did it. It never crossed our minds for a single moment, even though all these signs were there, that Gary would kill Maple. We lacked this knowledge. Maple lacked this knowledge. Everyone affected suffers. Going to sleep became a nightmare, making friends became harder, and the world around us became foggy. The center of our world became the cold, hard reality that Maple was killed and we couldn't do anything to help bring her back. What now? Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to your friends, and not to your family. Be aware of the red flags and don't take them lightly. If you get help, you might be scared that your friend will be mad at you, but it's that versus their safety and maybe even their life. Chances are that they will get over it. And if they don't, you should have a clear conscience of doing the right thing and taking the responsibility of their safety. As a friend, we all have the responsibility of being aware of what's going on in each other's lives. Ask your friend what's going on when they're feeling upset or angry. If your friend is making the wrong decisions, then step in and tell them, hey buddy, that's not okay, or that's not cool. If you see any of these red flags, you need to step in and help. Before leaving this webinar, we want you to promise yourself to take responsibility. When you leave this webinar, check in with at least one person. Let at least one person know that you are there for them. This might mean supporting them through a breakup or listening to them open up. We want you to keep in mind that this is a single story. This is Maple's story. Although this story was about a girl being a victim, there's no saying that the roles cannot be reversed. Our hope is that you are able to take something away from this presentation today. The reason we're doing this is because we never want our community to experience another tragedy like this again. In Maple's case, we never knew what the warning signs were, but now we're opening up this conversation to you, so you know. Please know that there are resources available that you may need that will be available at the end of this webinar. Thank you for your time.
Well, domestic violence comes in different forms. There is a perceived fear, a perceived threat by the victim, and that comes from the abuser's actions. These actions can include stalking, forced sex, destruction of personal property, or harming the family pet. And this indicates to the victim that, this time it was the pet, but next time it could be you. The victim could be left in unsafe situations by the abuser, and all of this to control her behavior, control who she sees, who she talks to, isolate her from her support systems. And like I said, threat can be almost anything. It could be the threat of sharing intimate photos to family and friends. That it's a way to control the victim into complying to what the abuser demands and to keep from leaving that abusive situation.
So as Julia said, that these toxic traits can look in many different ways, many different forms. But I think as a police officer, something that we can look for, which is pretty common in a lot of our intimate partner violence or domestic violence cases, where we're often seeing things that we would consider as toxic or unhealthy, is things like stalking. And I know that it's been mentioned before, and as well when we're talking about Maple's story, that there is a sense of, with stalking, the jealousy, the obsessive controlling behaviors, controlling and coercive behavior. So it's these sorts of things that from a toxic perspective, is this relationship toxic or not? These are some of the traits that I think as police we see quite often. So we also see things like threats. So consistently threatening your partner if they don't do certain things, making them feel not worthy, getting them to second guess themselves, etc. So kind of chipping away at their self-esteem. Sometimes we also look at previous intimate partner violence or just violence in general in the history. And that is often a trait as well. And that's not to say, like, I don't want to paint somebody with the same brush stroke, but these are often commonalities that we find within intimate partner violence, that often there is a bit of a history, whether it's with another partner or with somebody who we're dealing with currently right now. Sometimes we have alcohol and drugs involved, and we also have the mental health can also play a part in that if somebody's not being medicated properly. Just it becomes a cycle, and there's a number of aspects that continue to add into these traits that would be considered toxic in a relationship. So these are just some of the things that as police that we would see right off the get-go, where we would definitely be red flagging them, thinking, okay, we need to look further into this.
What I also wanted to add to what Heather said, and thank you, Heather, you're very comprehensive in your response. But I think one of the big things too to look for, which we often don't see and often isn't reported, is how a victim can be isolated in a variety of different ways, or how a victim as Heather referred to, can actually become to not believe herself because of the words that are constantly used by the perpetrator and or abuser. And so suddenly, because, or not suddenly, but over time, a victim will take on the perpetrator's beliefs and values and think that it's got to be all their fault. So really there are so many subtle different ways that a perpetrator can infiltrate a victim's belief system and really, really destroy their self-esteem.
My name's Candace, and I'm just jumping in here to help out Nicole. I manage our community police stations in Port Coquitlam, but I'm part of the same team. And I'll just go into our next question here, which I think is for Benisha. And what can someone do to help a friend that is in an abusive relationship who isn't ready to ask for help without alienating the relationship?
So touching base on what Carol had just mentioned, it comes down to a lot of it comes down to isolation, and the victim doesn't actually realize what is happening because they're in a cycle and they're constantly around their abuser, so they're suffocating in that relationship, and they don't actually get to see what the signs of an abusive relationship are, and they think that they're just in a healthy relationship because they end up in that for a while. As a friend, what you can do is reach for help. I mean, you obviously want to speak to your friend and let them know that they are in a healthy relationship, you are concerned, and sometimes that doesn't work out the best because they just don't have the trust in anyone else. I would definitely, had we known what the signs and the symptoms of a unhealthy relationship look like when we were dealing with Maple and Gary, I would have definitely gotten help from whether that's your high school counselor or as your liaison officer. It's about reaching for help for your friend, being that person that can take responsibility of the situation. Sometimes they won't do that themselves. In most cases, they won't reach out for help until they're at a life or death situation, that's when the RCMP or the police are involved. But as a friend, what you can do is let them know that they are in a healthy relationship, you are concerned about their safety, and you can definitely give them examples of what's happened in the past and what you're seeing is healthy and unhealthy, and then try to get them help that way so that it doesn't really alienate your relationship with them. And if that doesn't work out, then I would definitely step in and get help from whether that's an officer, a police officer, or your high school counselor or victim services.
Thank you for that. I think it does put people in a really tough position when you're trying to approach that subject. So those are some really good pointers. And I think going into our next question goes on to what other resources are available. So this is a question for Carol, and it's like, what are local resources available for women who are fleeing domestic violence in Coquitlam?
Thank you, Candace. So the very first resource in Coquitlam is to call 911 when you are dealing with domestic violence. Reach out as quickly as you can. Other resources in Coquitlam is Tri-City Transition Society. We run Joy's Place. It's a 24/7 transition house. So women can call 24/7. There's always staff on site. They can also call our main office during the day, and I believe that phone number will be shared at the end of the webinar. As well, there's also police-based victim services in Coquitlam. They are there working with the police and are available to help victims of violence as well. There's also Victim Link. There's BC 211. There's also the Ministry of Children and Family, who you can certainly make a call to. That is not that they will be able to immediately help you, but it certainly does put the perpetrator on notice that other resources are aware of what is happening to them. There's also, for anyone looking for a transition house, there's BC Housing's website that lists all of the transition houses in the province. And to know that a transition house that, for example, is run in the Tri-Cities is open to women from across the province, actually nationally and internationally. There are no waiting lists for transition houses. So please, if you find yourself in a situation, pick up the phone and call, because there is always support at the other end of the line.
I'd like to add as well, Victim Link. Some people have troubles reaching out for help because of language issues, and that's a barrier. Victim Link provides 24/7 support, and they can provide language support as well. So if you need to connect with a victim support worker, but you can't speak English, you can call Victim Link, ask for an interpreter to connect you with a victim services worker, and we can communicate through Victim Link interpretation services.
Awesome. No, that's also a very good point, and brings up more information. And I think it was also good that Carol addressed that it's not just covering Coquitlam, it does cover our Tri-Cities area and larger. So there are a lot of opportunities there for more people to get these resources and then specifically to Coquitlam. Going into our next question, we have, what does it mean to give consent?
I actually just looked up consent and through a criminal code, because I'm coming through the lens of a police officer and what we have to look for when it comes to consent. So the criminal code defines consent as solely the victim's state of mind towards the touching at the time that it has occurred. Consent requires a conscious operating mind capable of granting and revoking or withholding consent to each and every sexual act. Consent can be withdrawn at any time. So that's the basis of what the criminal code, how it defines consent. But where it gets, it's not tricky, or it's not something that we have to really explain a little further, is when we're dealing with somebody where there's a bit of a cultural difference in relationships. Man versus woman, the relationship, what it looks like, what potentially, like I'm sure we've all heard, that it's, I'll just use the term that it is the wife's responsibility to engage in sexual activity with her husband. And I'm just using that as a terminology, as a kind of a generalized statement, because we often hear about that when we're dealing with that as police. But regardless of being in an intimate partner, a marriage, anything like that, consent still plays a huge key, that the person, anybody in the relationship has the right to say no and to not consent. So regardless if you're an intimate partner relationship in a marriage, if you do not consent, that is considered sexual assault. Under domestic violence, it's bigger than that, because there's domestic violence, there's different risks that are at play with this, but that is what domestic violence is in when we're talking about intimate partner relationships. And we often have to have, I used to work at the detachment level, and we would often go to any newcomers when they would be new to our community, and we would have these very frank discussions with our new Canadians, our new immigrants, and talk about what the laws are here in Canada so that they understand. So it gives them a little more knowledge, a little more power in understanding what their rights are when it comes to consent. So I think that this video, I have watched this video and I've presented with this video many, many times. And I think that this is probably the best explanation for anybody at almost any age, obviously within reason, to explain what consent is. So here you go.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead and they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" and they're like, I'm not really sure," then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
I also wanted to add, as part of the risk factors that it's the BC Summary of Domestic Violence Risk Factors. This is something that the police look at, and it's a guide for them to review risk, to assess risk with regards to domestic violence. But forced sex is it's considered a risk factor in intimate partner violence. So it's something that needs to be at least acknowledged, and there's questions that need to be asked during that interview period when you are speaking with the victim, trying to get some background, some information on what's brought us to the police station or whatever's happened. So again, it is part of the risk management when it comes to domestic violence.
Our next question, after the consent conversation, I mean, obviously that's a very important topic to cover, and it was a bit of a cheeky video to try and cover just in a different language about what that consent can mean. But going into our next question, it's going to be for Julia, and it's about how to respond to or handle relationship violence that you may see in public. So this is a bit more of maybe less of an intimate friend or someone you know, but this is just something you're seeing in the public.
So my suggestion would be to call the police, draw attention to the situation. If the person is being beaten in front of you, sometimes drawing the attention can stop the act, sometimes not. But calling the police is the best thing you can do, and maintaining your own safety. Take note of what's going on, because you could be called as a witness later, and that's the best way you can help the victim in that situation. But maintaining your safety is important too.
Thank you for that as well. And it can be a bit of a difficult situation because it's hard to read the context of what's happening. But as you said, safety is obviously number one. And for Carol, our next question is, why does it take so many times for someone to leave an abusive relationship?
There are a variety of reasons why it takes so many times to leave a relationship. It could be because there's the uncertainty of self-trust, of trusting yourself to know that this is really what you need to do for yourself. And if you have children, for your children as well. But that often gets eroded when you're in an abusive relationship. So therefore, self-esteem also has been hampered. In fact, probably destroyed in some cases. So women generally choose to stay. Financial aspects are another thing, because then women wonder and worry and are concerned, how will they ever survive on their own? I don't have any resources. And if I don't believe in myself, I may not believe that I'm capable of actually being able to take care of myself and my children. Then mix into that also just the feeling of security, knowing that even though you're in an abusive situation and it's horrible, but you do currently have a roof over your head, and sometimes, not all the time, you do have food for your children as well. Then also mix into that the issues that come with religion and or culture, family traditions, where it's really, really horrible. And yes, I want to leave and I make the decision to leave. And then I find myself going back again because I don't want to be responsible for breaking up the family. What will my extended family say? How will they keep telling me I need to go back when they're not supportive? So I feel alone, all by myself, no self-worth, no self-trust, and I'm back in the abusive relationship again.
It definitely plays into that cycle of all the different thoughts that go into people's minds as you're going through this process, and the different things and aspects that are, you know, affecting individuals and into their reasoning as to maybe why they can't move into a next phase. And I think this plays into one of our last questions that we're going to explore. Obviously, we had a lot, and it's only a short period of time. We're running into a few minutes left, but I think our next question will be for Julia, which is about how will I survive if I leave the relationship? So that kind of plays on that cycle and the thoughts that people are going through.
Okay, well, how will I survive when leaving a relationship? The key is to connect with support systems. If you are receiving support from family and friends, that's great. We do get strength from our family and friends, but sometimes it's not always enough. Sometimes it's not there. And that's why we have resources specifically for women leaving abusive situations. These resources can include counseling, safe houses where they can stay, financial assistance to victims of crime that helps pay for counseling, travel costs, moving costs, sometimes lost wages. And it's a separate program from police-based victim services or Carol's program, Tri-Cities Transitions. It's crime victims assistance, and they help pay for some of the expenses incurred as a result of the crime. And there's support out there for legal assistance, women leaving situation, not knowing custody access orders or protection orders. Victim services and Tri-Cities Transitions can help guide the way in that direction.
I'd just like to add one thing to what Julia has already stated. When the victim makes a decision to leave, one of the biggest things to recognize is that first step shows and demonstrates a victim's resourcefulness and their self-resiliency. That is the very first step for them to step into to begin to rebuild the self-trust in who they are. And that's a critical piece as well.
Thank you, Carol. Definitely that does play into it when making that decision. Why don't we round out this conversation? And I think we can maybe wrap 2 questions into one. We'll see if we can try this out. But what can your group do? We'll go through each group here and just talk about what your group can do to help a victim of domestic violence. I think you've kind of touched on them, but let's go into specifics. And maybe we can leave one thing that you would want people to take from this presentation in that wrap up, and we can work our way through the screen. So for me, I think we'll start with Carol, and that would be again, what can your group do to support a victim with domestic violence? And then one takeaway.
Thank you, Candace. Well, in addition to the resources I mentioned earlier and what Julia has just previously mentioned, so what we can do for a victim of domestic violence is certainly we offer a safe house. That's a 30-day stay. And that in that program, we provide emotional support, we provide practical support and referral support to a woman in need and to her children. Then we wrap around those services. We also provide counseling support for women, we provide counseling support for the children, and we run the community-based victim service program where we work very closely with Julia and the police-based victim service program. In that program, we work with the victims of domestic violence. We provide court support. We also provide emotional support and practical support. We are there for them. We hear their stories and we walk with them every step of the way as they are moving, say, through the court process, but as they're moving forward in their healing process as well and delivering and as they are building their self-resiliency, as we do in the counseling programs for women and for children as well. The takeaway from today is that thank you everyone for participating today, because domestic violence is everyone's issue. It's a community issue. It's not just women and children, it's also a men's issue. So for all of us working together we actually can create that place for a woman to have the courage to take the steps to change.
Thanks, Carol. I appreciate your words. And maybe we can move in towards Julia and we'll round it out with Heather, and then Benisha can have our last little message here.
Thank you. So police-based victim services, we work closely with the police and provide crisis intervention. We're usually the first point of contact for victims of crime and other trauma. And we can provide resources. One of our greatest resources is Tri-Cities Transitions. We can assist by explaining the criminal justice system and help victims navigate through the system. We also provide court updates and other resources. If the victim has to leave the community, we can connect that person with other resources in the community that they choose to be in. Sometimes people have to leave the community for their own safety, and that's something that we do. We provide safety planning, and we also explain what a victim's rights are under Provincial Victims of Crime Act or the Bill of Rights through the federal program. There are rights for victims of crime, and everyone deserves to be treated with fairness and respect. You are entitled to know about victim services programs and resources available to you. You are entitled to know about financial assistance for victims of crime, and you have the right to privacy. So these are things that we'll explain to our clients, usually the first point of contact, and then we can provide follow-up if needed.
Thank you. And we can go into Heather's perspective as well.
So my clients, in the role that I'm in currently with E-Division headquarters, so my clients are all the police officers, RCMP of course, from all of the province. So from the top end to the very bottom end here where we are down in the Lower Mainland. So that's who my typical clients are, as well as community partners. But that in turn, I'm the person that helps with the training when it comes to domestic violence or intimate partner violence. So one thing that's coming out of our office is the ICAT training, so the Interagency Case Assessment Team training. And the Coquitlam detachment does have an ICAT within their, I think that it might be within a domestic violence unit. I'm not quite sure the name of the unit. But that in itself is, it's a partnership with local agencies, and the police sit within that within that partnership, and it includes police, child welfare, health, social services, victim support, and other organizations. And this group responds to referrals suspected of highest risk domestic violence cases. And the aim is to increase safety around all parties. So reiterating what Carol had talked about in closing is that it's really important that we look at the totality of this family, the family in crisis, that we have to pay attention to and keep safe victim and children, or women and children. But we also need to pay attention to our in police terms, we refer to the offender, that because we don't want somebody to reoffend, that we have a responsibility to manage these risks, and that's just something that we it's very challenging, because if it's part of the system when it comes to if somebody's released on conditions, not on any conditions, if they're in jail, not in jail, it becomes quite difficult for monitoring our offenders out there, because there's not a lot of services that assist these offenders. So it does become quite a challenge, but if we work together as a team, especially on these ICATs, that we have much better results and much better success with whichever decision this family decides, whether it's going to be reunification or separation. But I also want to say from our office, we also do Be Safer, and that is just a risk assessment tool for domestic violence. And we also offer a number of workshops, both for our frontline members as well as our community partners. And they can range from anything from strangulation to violence in the workplace, technology through the BC Society Transition Houses. We often will partner with any of our community partners throughout the province. And again, I just want to reiterate as well that the BC Society of Transition House has a phenomenal, it's a toolkit with regards to technology, because this is something within intimate partner violence that we need to start paying a lot more attention to, about safety and the communication piece to keep our victims and children safe and still attached to their community and the people that assist them and help them. So that's what I can offer. And as I said, just reiterating what Carol said, is that we have to look at this family in totality. So that's everybody in the family, everybody part of the issue at hand or the crisis that they're going through. It's just not women and children anymore. We have to look at the offender as well. So.
And Benisha, I don't know if you have any other further wrapping up comments that you'd like to bring to the forefront. Oh, you're muted.
There you go. Just want to say thank you to everyone for joining, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking the time to be a part of this and sharing their resources. There's lots of takeaways from this. I want everyone to know that there are resources out there from all of the wonderful ladies that shared today, and that's both for men and women. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter if you're a single woman or if you're a single or a family man. Abuse is abuse, and abuse comes in many different forms, and there's help out there. Just know that, and just know that you're not alone in this situation. And that's something that is very easily, you can get in that cycle and think that you're alone, and it's hard. Also, as a friend, because I was a friend of Maple's, if you do know or are aware of a friend being in an unhealthy relationship, don't be a bystander. Take the responsibility and make that step to make sure that there is safety for them, and let them know that you have done so and that they need to be safe at the end of the day. Yeah, that's just what I wanted you to take home, and just want to thank you guys again.
Awesome. I really appreciate all of you speaking today, and I wanted to just express that obviously our time always goes so fast, and I do have my own takeaways, as well as I know Nicole would reiterate this too, that again, if something isn't right and it doesn't seem right to you in either your own relationship or someone else's, then you should definitely reach out. And as we saw today, there are so many resources, and I mean, we have such a great panelists, and we really just don't want to see this happen to anyone else like it did to Maple. And so I want to thank you again to our panelists for their great discussion, and thank you all to the attendees who were coming and signing on with us today. I have found this webinar helpful. At our community police stations, we see people come in asking questions, and we use these resources, but now it's more broadly known and more people will be aware. So we'll be sending out a survey link to you guys later today, our participants and our speakers, for any feedback on what you liked and what you'd like to see more of for these presentations. Our next webinar is on the topic of mental health awareness, and this will be held on May 4th at noon, and this is to cover Mental Health Awareness Week. We have some great speakers who are on that call as well. So you can follow up on our Coquitlam RCMP social media and get details on how to sign up. And then also on this page here, you can see all of our great resources and how to follow us as well. So we'll leave this up for a little bit, but I want to thank you again to everyone who is, again, panelist and or attendee, and we hope to see you next time. We appreciate all your time.